What's the biggest mistake you've made while traveling or on vacation? One time, I was on vacation in Spain, staying at a beautiful hotel on the coast. It was the perfect getaway. Sunshine, sea, delicious food, and plenty of fun. But here's what happened one evening when my friends and I decided to hang out in our hotel room and soak in the atmosphere. That evening, we were sitting on the balcony of our room, laughing and enjoying the view of the sea. Suddenly, my friend Jason brought up a game we used to play back home. Dropping water balloons from balconies. You know, just a silly little thing. But of course, it was a terrible idea. Jokingly, we grabbed a few bags and started tossing them off the balcony, trying to hit nearby objects. I thought it would just be a fun way to pass the time. But, as often happens, reality turned out to be much more interesting. One big bag of water that Jason dropped landed right on a table on the restaurant patio, where people were enjoying dinner. The funniest part? It didn't just hit the table. It literally drenched the diners who were eating pasta. Liters of water spilled over the table, splashing their plates, their hands, and one poor guy looked like he had just stepped out of the shower. Everyone around started screaming. Some were trying to wipe food off themselves, while others just stood there, stunned by what had happened. At first, we couldn't believe what we'd done and froze in shock for a few seconds. Then, realizing that no one had been seriously hurt and that it was more of a comedic situation, we burst into laughter. Some diners in the restaurant started laughing too. Of course, the waiters rushed over to the table to help, while we stayed on the balcony, trying not to give ourselves away any further. Those people were understandably furious and upset, which I totally got. I felt bad for what happened to them, even though the situation was genuinely hilarious. Eventually, we returned to our own business, but every time we walked past that restaurant, we couldn't help but laugh, recalling that unforgettable moment. If you've got a moment, let me take you through one of the most awkward moments of my life. So my friends and I went on a trip to Spain. You know, sun, beaches, parties, the usual dream vacation stuff. We stayed at this nice hotel close to the coast. The hotel was great, and our room was huge. Perfect for 3 20-something guys who felt invincible and ready for anything. One day, our friend Max went to a local store to grab some snacks and drinks. While he was gone, Jack and I stayed in the room and decided to prank him when he got back. I have no idea what possessed us to think this was a good idea, but at the time, it seemed like pure genius. The plan was simple. We were going to give him a little horror show. What did we do? We grabbed some masks from the movie Scream, found an old black cloak, which, for some reason, was lying in the closet. Seriously, who leaves that stuff in a hotel room? And decided to scare him when he returned. We knew he'd be coming up the elevator, so the plan was, as soon as the elevator doors opened on our floor, we'd jump out in full horror mode. Perfect plan, right? At least, for 2 bored guys with nothing better to do. We waited. Then we heard the sound of the elevator. "Okay, that's definitely Max," Jack whispered. The doors started to open, and we jumped out right in front of them, screaming our heads off with full-on "boo" vibes. Except it wasn't Max. Inside the elevator was a woman, with a small child. For a few seconds, everyone froze. There we were in these ridiculous masks. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost, and the child, who had no idea what was happening, started screaming in pure terror. The woman looked like she was either going to call the police or faint, because 2 idiots in masks had just nearly scared her and her kid to death. We were completely caught off guard, instantly ripping off our masks and shouting, Sorry, this wasn't for you, we were waiting for a friend." The situation kept getting more absurd because she just stood there, trying to calm down her child, who was now bawling his eyes out. Then it hit me. Oh my God, this is horrible. What were we even thinking? Jack looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The woman finally spoke, and as you might expect, she was more than just upset. "What is wrong with you? You think this is funny? You just terrified my child." She kept trying to calm him down, but he was in full meltdown mode. Jack and I stood there like guilty school kids, mumbling apologies, explaining that it was just a failed attempt to prank our friend. But who was listening to us? She said she was going to report us to the hotel staff, which honestly was more than fair. We spent another minute awkwardly apologizing as she stormed off, muttering something like, "Unbelievable." As soon as she disappeared into her room, Jack and I just stood there in the hallway, completely unsure whether we should laugh or cry. I was so embarrassed that I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. But wait, it gets better. About 10 minutes later, Max finally showed up, completely oblivious. He walked into the room to find a scene he probably never expected. His two friends sitting silently in the corner, still in masks and black cloaks, looking absolutely defeated. "What happened?" he asked. Jack and I exchanged glances, then we told him the whole story. His reaction? He laughed so hard he was practically crying. And now, every time we think back to that trip, we don't talk about the amazing beaches or the fun parties. Nope, we always end up laughing about how we almost got ourselves in serious trouble over a prank gone wrong. Moral of the story: if you're planning a prank, make sure it's your friend stepping out of the elevator, not a random woman with her child. This happened back in 2016 when we were all obsessed with that crazy bubble-wrapped combo, Mentos and Coke. My classmates and I were on a school trip at a hotel in Spain. Before the trip, many of my classmates bought Coca-Cola, and someone came up with an idea that we thought would be super cool: mixing Mentos with Coke right in our room. Some people brought bottles of Coke, others tossed in the Mentos candies, and of course, chaos ensued. Liters of fizzy liquid erupted from the bottles, spraying everywhere in the room, and we were laughing so loud that it could be heard down the hotel corridor. It was such an epic scene that it felt like we were hosting a mini festival in our room. But as always happens when things are going well, something had to go wrong. Just then, the door to our room opened. Our teacher walked in, and nobody noticed. She must have had an inkling that something was up when she saw us all gathered around the Coke bottles. My classmate Andrew was filming on his phone as Jack tossed the last piece of Mentos into a bottle. At that exact moment, the foam from the Coke erupted from the bottle and splashed all over our teacher, who had entered without us noticing. Our teacher, furious and completely soaked in Coke, stood there for a few seconds in stunned silence. We all froze in shock. She looked at us and said, "This is not a joke. I'm calling your parents and telling them what happened." We were, of course, in a panic. Nobody expected it to end like this. The teacher quickly left the room and, as promised, started making calls a few minutes later. We didn't know what to do. Our minds were racing about how we would apologize to our parents. Honestly, it didn't feel funny anymore. This situation became a lesson for all of us. Sometimes, it's better to leave these experiments to others and think about the consequences. This story began at one of the resort hotels when I decided to have a little fun during my vacation. The hotel was located right on the seashore, but the biggest attraction for me was the enormous pool situated on the premises. And of course, when the sun is blazing, nothing compares to a pool as the best place to relax. My room was on the second floor, and I often stepped out onto the balcony to look at the pool and generally enjoy the view. One day, I saw a girl sunbathing on a lounge chair right at the edge of the pool, relaxed and seemingly completely unaware that I was about to do something utterly reckless. My idea was simple: to jump into the pool from the balcony because it looked incredibly cool. I had seen stunts like this in movies for ages and wanted to feel like a hero for a few seconds. So I decided that this was the perfect moment. What could go wrong? I thought. And that was the moment I became truly foolish. I assessed the height and decided that the jump was quite safe since the pool looked deep enough and the water was clear and inviting. However, I overlooked one important detail. I didn't check that there was a person sunbathing right at the edge of the pool. So I ran, took a step, and jumped. If I had anticipated this, I probably would have aimed to jump a few meters to the left, but I landed literally next to her, right at the pool's edge, and at the moment of landing, I splashed her with water. I hit the water, and the moment I climbed out, I saw the look on her face. Naturally, she was in shock, almost completely soaked and totally not expecting someone to jump right next to her. At first, she didn't even realize what had happened and stared at me as if I were a fool. "Oh, sorry. I started to explain the situation, but then I realized it looked so ridiculous that words couldn't possibly fix it. She just smiled, although it was such a funny and awkward moment that I immediately started to blush. She nodded and said, "Well, that was a strange way to cool off." After that, I tried to apologize quickly and escape from the whole situation, but then I realized that this was actually one of the biggest blunders of my life. Though it was funny, I never attempted such stunts again. Now, every time I see someone near the pool, even just lying on a lounge chair, I nervously glance around to avoid ending up in a similar situation. Well, here's my biggest blunder during a vacation in Italy. My girlfriend Kate and I headed to a hotel on the Sorrento coast, and I decided to impress her with a romantic dinner prepared by me in our room. I knew for sure that she adored Italian food, but cooking, to put it mildly, isn't my strong suit. However, I thought, what could go wrong? It's just a pie. I found a recipe for an Italian chocolate cake online and decided it would be the perfect choice, but I clearly underestimated the complexity of the process. At first, everything was going smoothly. I measured the flour, mixed the ingredients, and even felt like a real chef. But then the worst part began. Somehow, the whole process turned into a disaster. While I was melting the chocolate for the filling, I accidentally plunged my hand into the cocoa powder jar, and it ended up covered in flour. At that moment, I thought I should taste the chocolate. And as you can guess, I didn't wipe my mouth. So instead of looking like a hero, I looked like a complete chocolate monster. My mouth was all covered in chocolate, and I had no time to clean up because Kate was about to return from her walk. I tried to clean myself up, but it was a total fail. I was covered in flour, chocolate, and my hands were a mess too. Basically, I looked like a scene from a cooking show gone wrong. And then, as luck would have it, the door opened, and Kate walked into the room. She found me right in the middle of this culinary storm, standing in the kitchen, looking like I had just had a big fight with the dough. She looked at me, then at the kitchen, and of course, couldn't help but laugh. "Well, I see you're a real chef," she said, laughing, and I couldn't help but laugh along with her. I tried to explain that it was all supposed to look very romantic, but from that moment on, every time we talk about food, she laughs and remembers how I was covered in chocolate and drenched in dough. By the end of the evening, we just ordered pizza and laughed for a long time about how I tried to become a chef in Italy. During my vacation in the Alps, I decided to hike up a mountain to see the incredible views. I was so captivated by the nature around me that I completely ignored the recommendations of the local guides and didn't take a map. My thinking was, well, it's a mountain trail. I'm on a path. There's no way I'll get lost. I set off at 9 a.m. and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But as it began to get dark, I realized I had no idea which direction I was heading. The mountains around me looked identical, and I started to panic little by little. I wandered for hours trying to find any landmarks. It wasn't until 6 p.m. that I realized I should probably rest and call for help, but I had left my phone at the hotel, thinking I wouldn't need it. Finally, I stumbled upon a group of hikers who fortunately had a map, and they helped me find my way back. All this time, I was convinced that I might have entered some parallel world because even the flies were flying twice as slowly there. What turned out to be the most foolish was that I was the only person on the entire mountain who didn't have a map. Even seasoned hikers had at least a GPS device in their hands. As a result, I spent the entire day trying to find my way back, and now every time I set off on a trip, I always make sure to take a map and my phone. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting new content. Hit the notification bell to get alerts for every new video. That way, you'll always stay up to date with all the latest updates. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next video.